Thanks for joining us on another new week of all things people, power, and politics. As we're off to a busy start, this is The Pulse. I'm Roop Raj. President Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy meeting in the Oval Office, a much calmer one than earlier this year. But there's another major headline coming out of that meeting that's completely unrelated, involving mail-in ballots. We're going to play a game of Can He Do That? With Oakland University Political Science Chair Peter Trumbore. We're also taking a closer look at how President Trump is handling the war in Ukraine. He said he'd end it on day one. Today, he says it'll end, but he says he can't say exactly when. So what does that mean for a man who sees himself as a master negotiator? Democrat Michael LaRosa and Republican Rocky Richkowski are weighing in tonight. And a familiar face is in Studio C talking about his fight to help educate people for climate change. Former Fox 2 meteorologist Chris Edwards. Remember him? We know him well, and he's well loved in this community. What he says you need to do to help reverse the dangerous trend at your own home with your own family. We'll talk about that and how to get away from politics when it comes to talking about our environment. All of that ahead, but right now we want to pick up the pace and get you caught up on some of the other big stories we're following right now, starting with the Jeffrey Epstein investigation, because the Justice Department agrees now to give Congress documents from the sex trafficking case. Those records will be turned over to the House Oversight Committee starting on Friday. The committee's subpoena demands all documents and communications from the case against Epstein, as well as his girlfriend, his former girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell. Right now, it's not clear which documents will be produced. Conservative network Newsmax will pay $67 million to settle a lawsuit over bogus election claims. Dominion Voting Systems sued Newsmax after it spread lies about President Trump's 2020 election loss. A judge ruled the network defamed Dominion, but left it to a jury to decide if it was actually malice. Newsmax agreed to settle with the company. It already paid $40 million to another voting manufacturer, and Fox News Channel paid more than $787 million to Dominion in a similar lawsuit. And speaking of networks, a major cable channel is getting a makeover and a new name. MSNBC will now become MS Now later this year. MS Now stands for My Source News Opinion World. The change was ordered by NBC Universal after it spun off several cable networks, including MSNBC. None of the other networks are changing their names. The network's president says, despite the name change, its editorial direction will remain the same. Now to that Oval Office meeting between President Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. It looked a lot different than the first one, which devolved into President Trump and Vice President Vance shouting down Zelenskyy opposing them. The president hosted Zelenskyy and several other top European leaders, and the president said a possible ceasefire and who gets Ukrainian territory that Russia seized should be hashed out face-to-face between Zelenskyy and Russian President Vladimir Putin. Zelenskyy said he's ready for a meeting between Putin, Trump, and himself.
We need to stop this war, to stop Russia, and we need support American and European partners. And we will do our best for this. I think we show that we are strong people, and we supported the idea of the United States, of personally of President Trump, to stop this war, to make a diplomatic way of finishing this war.
But we're going to work with Ukraine, we're going to work with everybody, and we're going to make sure that if there's peace, the peace is going to stay long term. This is very long term. We're not talking about a 2-year peace and then we end up in this mess again. We're going to make sure that everything's good. We'll work with Russia, we're going to work with Ukraine, and we're going to make sure it works.
But despite the 3-year war and the toll it's taken on so many, that wasn't the biggest headline to come out of the meeting. President Trump vowed to issue an executive order, you hear about this, vowing to get rid of mail-in voting and voting machines. The absentee voting move would disenfranchise about a third of voters, and voting machines are used in almost all of the nation's election jurisdictions. President Trump leaned on conspiracy theories he repeatedly used to explain his 2020 election loss, and then made this claim as well.
You know that we're the only country in the world, I believe, I may be wrong, but just about the only country in the world that uses them because of what's happened. Massive fraud all over the place.
And as we do on this program, we fact-check both sides, Democrats and Republicans. We did it with Harris and Biden. We're doing it now. That claim is not right. Here's why. Dozens of other countries use mail-in voting as well, including Germany, Switzerland, and the UK. Now, keep in mind, the president actually has no control over elections. And here's why. The Constitution gives that power to the states. That's on purpose. But Congress has the authority to make or alter rules for federal elections. The president isn't mentioned at all as someone who has powers over elections, and the courts have agreed that presidents simply aren't involved. And we should point out, once again, there is no evidence of widespread voter fraud. There were irregularities, but no widespread fraud. Between that and the war between Russia and Ukraine, there's simply a lot to unpack tonight, and we have just the guy to do it. Oakland University Political Science Chair, Dr. Peter Trombor, is in Studio C with us tonight. And as always, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining us here on The Pulse.
Thanks for having me back.
I want to begin where we just left off at the big wall there, a little bit about the election stuff. When you talk about President Trump, to me, it's easy, people forget. In 2024, President Trump actually was encouraging Republican voters to use mail-in voting, and actually has used mail-in voting himself because he travels so much. Is this a complete contradiction to that?
Donald Trump is nothing if not inconsistent. And he's consistent in his inconsistency. I mean, Donald Trump uses mail-in voting and has used mail-in voting for years when he casts a ballot. When he loses, he blames the system and calls it rigged against him. And when he wins, the system is the best in the world. So I think what we see is that inconsistency, that consistent inconsistency coming back in this meeting. It was a little odd to me, the way that this meeting devolved into sort of this rambling discussion of issues unrelated to the whole reason why they were all there in D.C. in the first place, which is to talk about a potential peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine.
We have gotten used to the fact that this is a president who does not use the bully pulpit, the podium, as a place to have some kind of linear message. He often goes off on different tangents, but that's not a shock. But what is a surprise to many, and I should mention, because we're now switching gears and talking about this conversation, between these European leaders so quickly after that meeting in Alaska, it is being lauded by both Republicans and some Democrats out there who I've spoken with on the phone, who are lawmakers in Washington, who say, hey, if he can try his hand at peace, no one else has done this recently, and this is a good thing. Would you agree?
You're right. It's not a terrible thing for there to be peace between Russia and Ukraine.
It's a good thing.
It's a fantastic. It would be a fantastic thing, depending upon the terms of what that peace looks like. If this is a peace that comes after 3 years of Ukrainian suffering, and the demands are that all of the concessions are made by Ukraine, including giving up security guarantees, giving up important regions of eastern Ukraine that Russia has not currently been able to capture on the battlefield. If that's the price of peace, then I'm not sure I would call that a good thing. If it is an agreement that ultimately emerges in which both sides give something, and so far we've seen no willingness on the part of Vladimir Putin to entertain any kind of concessions, any kind of stepping back from what has been the sort of maximalist position that Ukraine must essentially be separated from the West, that Ukraine must demilitarize, that Ukraine must surrender territory. Until Russia is willing to step away from some of those things, I don't see much progress happening.
I thought it was interesting that out of all the leaders that you had there, the youngest guy in the room was the leader of Finland. And he actually spoke about his own country's history, having this really bad strife with Russia back in the 40s. And by 1944, they had the Moscow Armistice, right? The treaty that essentially gave them peace. But he's hoping for a similar deal. Looking at history, it is possible, isn't it, even with Putin?
I would say it's possible with the Soviet Union. I would say it is possible with pre-Soviet Russia. I'm not certain it's possible with Vladimir Putin at the helm in Russia. And I think we simply have to look at Putin's unwillingness all along to entertain any kind of limitation on what he sees as the reconstruction of sort of a Russian imperial project and a return of Russia to the predominant position on the world stage. Vladimir Putin has reneged on virtually every agreement he has reached when it comes to Ukraine in particular, certainly since 2014. If we go back to the earlier in the 2000s and the war against the Republic of Georgia and other similar sort of situations, Putin is not a reliable negotiating partner.
But does this meeting that happened today give that kind of squeeze that's needed perhaps to under Putin's on his neck to say, look, we have France, we have the European Union, we have Germany, and they're all saying we're on this guy's side with Zelenskyy. Doesn't that do something to move the meter, sanctions-wise?
Well, here's the thing. So before Friday, Donald Trump said that unless a ceasefire came out of Friday's meeting, Russia would face severe consequences. And there were both no ceasefire and no consequences. So I think what Putin is hoping for is that the squeeze will be put on Volodymyr Zelenskyy.
Sure.
And that Trump will get so frustrated that he'll essentially walk away. And this idea of Putin's is to split the United States away from our European allies. And if he's successful there, then there's not much that the Europeans can do to fill the void that will be left.
Peter Trumborough, we're out of time, but I want to say thank you, as usual, for joining us here on The Pulse and helping unpack this with us.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. We're keeping the conversation about Russia and Ukraine going. Right after this break, Rocky Richkowski and Michael LaRosa, a discussion about President Trump's deal-making skills. You're watching The Pulse here on Fox 2. Great.
Yo.
Back now on The Pulse, looking at all things people, power, and politics. Joining us now to keep the conversation about this big world stage story that everyone's talking about, Russia and Ukraine, former Republican State House Majority Leader Rocky Richkowski and political commentator, and live via Zoom, former press secretary to First Lady Jill Biden, Michael LaRosa. Michael, great to see you. Thanks for joining us. And Rocky, always great to see you as well.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Michael, let's begin with you. You talked to a lot of folks across Washington and across the country. I found it striking and also peculiar that so many Democrats that I've spoken with today in the course of the day actually were kind of bipartisan about this and nonpartisan about it and said, look, if this president can strike a deal in some way, shape, or form, let it be. That's good news for all of us. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm rooting for success in this peace negotiation. I admire the fact that he is so persistent in trying to get peace. I just think that we have to be careful that it's not peace at any cost. I mean, I don't think he wants to be the third president now to, allow Putin to expand his reach into Europe under his watch. George W. Bush did. When Putin invaded Georgia, did nothing. Obama did nothing when Putin invaded Crimea. We can't just accept these territorial grabs by Putin because he's just going to keep going. So I really hope that they're able to get somewhere with security assurances and a deal.
I find that noteworthy because obviously today's meeting with all the European leaders suggested that especially Germany and France were saying, look, a ceasefire is the only way. And I found it peculiar also that President Trump said, look, I'm going to try for that, but I can't guarantee that. But some other things are in the works. What do you see, Rocky, coming out of all of this when it's all said and done?
Well, number one, kind of echoing what Michael said, I'm actually praying for peace, but also hoping for the right end. And I think that this president's actually doing it the right way. Michael mentioned that George W. Bush didn't act when Russia went into Georgia, and President Obama didn't act when Russia went into Crimea. And Biden didn't react really when Russia went into Ukraine properly, and actually may have potentially given them a green light by some of the press conferences that they've had beforehand. But this president, in his first term, actually used kinetic weapons, anti-tank weapons that he gave to Ukraine. It was said that Obama gave pillows and blankets. This president gave kinetic weapons. And that's what's been happening. This president is also working from a position where he's not, for the first time ever, he's not telegramming and answering press questions about his meetings with Putin. And look at today.
And that's a good thing,
And
right?
look at today, absolutely. I'd love to hear Michael's opinion, but today, even Zelenskyy canceling his interview with Fox News, with Bret Baier on Fox News, and basically going back to Ukraine, and none of the leaders talking. It was a silence moment. And one of the reasons that they may be silenced is they don't want to telegraph a message to Russia about their next move.
I thought that was definitely consequential in not talking to the press. Don't you think, Michael?
Sure. First of all, it's traditional. It's his President Trump style is anything but traditional, and that's fine too. But it would be normal not to telegraph messages to Russia. In this case, It was a sort of a family intervention. I've never seen our European allies drop their schedules to scramble over to the United States so fast. I think it's historic in that respect, but that's because they really don't trust President Trump to make a good deal.
I disagree.
But I would also just want to push back and say, I would just push back and say that, remember, like I said earlier, Bush and Obama saw Russia expand its reach. We actually, under President Biden, expanded NATO, strengthened it, rallied the world around Ukraine's side, and it's because it's because of the $189 billion that we supplied them with weapons. That's the only reason why Putin is at the table. Putin wants a deal because he can't get land on the battlefield because he's losing thanks to Joe Biden's support for military aid.
Michael, that's great political revisionist history, but the person that strengthened NATO, the person that really expanded NATO and strengthened NATO was President Trump, and the person that expanded NATO was President Putin, not President Biden. So you can take all
you should ask our allies that
history,
question.
But no, that's quite frank.
I think if you did ask our allies that question, they would disagree with you,
and
Rocky,
they may disagree.
You should ask our allies that.
The American press may be saying that, but that's just not the case.
Okay, I want to talk about Article 5. We only have a minute left here, guys. Quickly, Michael and Rocky.
Yeah.
For those who aren't familiar, Article 5, simplistically put, is obviously if you mess with Ukraine, you're messing with us. An alliance of countries can say. There's talk of an Article 5-like consequence being put in this deal. Michael, do you think that that's something that's viable, that will happen? And if it does, will it stop Putin?
I would like to see it happen. I don't think it will happen. However, I don't think Putin would accept that. I mean, first of all, we're the only country in the history of NATO who's used Article 5, who's ever had to use that trigger. And it was because of 9/11.
Because of Article, yeah.
Rocky,
that NATO is there for a reason.
So I actually served with a lot of those foreign troops. But no, I think that this is exactly what we'll do. NATO membership will be off the table, but Article 5 defense guarantees, very similar to the agreement that was struck in the 1990s under Clinton, will be in place, but there will be troops that will be defending Ukraine.
30 seconds left. The chances of a trilateral meeting between Putin, Zelenskyy, and Trump.
I'm praying for it. I'm hoping it happens, and it will set the ground rules for the bilateral meeting that will basically set up the agreements for peace framework.
Michael, the chances of this actually happening.
It's hard to say when it comes to President Trump. It sounds like they're moving to make it happen. Again, I think it's all going to be about in the details of security guarantees and what that actually means. As you just mentioned, 1994, Putin doesn't really pay attention to agreements. So I don't know what
until there's soldiers on the ground.
Unless there's United States boots on the ground, as the Wall Street Journal said today, that's the only thing that matters, because Putin's agreements are worse than worthless.
The Russian economy has not been this weak in a long time also, so the sanctions actually may be the equivalent of boots on the ground, but we'll see. Look, we're all watching this the same way from the same vantage point, not in the room where it's happening. So we'll watch it carefully. Michael LaRosa, great to see you. Rocky, always great to see you. Thanks for joining us. You know, we're headed outside for the next segment. Well, sort of. Climate change is still a big concern for many. And a former Fox 2 meteorologist has a very, very clear message for all of us. We can do something right now. You're watching The Pulse on Fox 2. It is People, Power, and Politics. Welcome back to Detroit's only nightly political talk show. This, my friends, is The Pulse. Joining us now to talk about climate change and an event coming up to make sure everyone's aware about the dangers it poses and what we all can do. Yeah. Climate change activist and former Fox 2 meteorologist Chris Edwards. So don't adjust your calendar and you think it's 2009 or 2010. And then you were at Channel 7 for a while, so you were on the air in Detroit for a total of how many years?
30-ish, but if I say any longer, it makes me feel old,
You're
so forget
not old.
that.
You are not old, but you're old enough to know that the words climate change from, well, heck, when you first started here in 1992, the elections were going and Al Gore was talking about climate change.
Right.
It became a political nomiker. When people hear climate change, they automatically go politics. Why is that counterproductive for all of us?
Well, it's counterproductive because climate change is science. At its core, it is science, and science shouldn't be political, and science in most instances isn't political, but in some cases it has turned that way, and that is unfortunate because when things get politicized, then we don't have a clear view of what it is really at stake and what's actually going on. Climate change is not something that's coming, Roop. It's here, it's accelerating all the time.
I find it fascinating because I talk to so many conservative lawmakers who actually agree that we've seen, you know, the torrential rains and the higher winds. And you look at these hurricanes and the force that they pack these
Wildfires
days.
too,
Wildfires.
and the smoke. Yeah.
What are the things that people aren't talking about that indicate to you that there is some kind of change?
Well, I mean, you just hit on some of them, and of course, heat waves themselves are becoming much more prevalent, and the extremities, the extremes in weather are greater. So we can still get big cold snaps. Absolutely we can. They don't tend to last as long, but they can be severe in places where they weren't before. So all over the map, literally and figuratively, climate change is making itself known. And let me tell you something here, Roop. This is not political. Climate change is something that shows up when you get up in the morning and you see that the air quality is terrible because of the wildfires, Canada or otherwise. Wildfires are more common because of climate change, and they are larger because of climate change. How about your insurance costs? Whether it's you paying it as an owner or your landlord paying it, the insurance costs are skyrocketing for homes and apartments, and it's largely because of climate change. The insurance companies are very, very aware of this, and they're making us all know that climate change is happening with our pocketbooks.
And you now are doing something, and you have been for a while, but you're saying you're doing a virtual seminar coming up on Tuesday.
Right.
And you're saying there's something that we all can do. Look, if you don't agree or agree, take the politics out. There's a QR code. If people want to scan that with their phone, they can sign up. What are you teaching people in this class?
This is an entire hour between myself and the EDF, which is going to be about what individuals can do. Because so often we hear about it, we get stressed about it, but we don't think there's anything that we can do. A majority of Americans say, I am clueless about what to do. This is an hour devoted to pragmatic, practical things that you can do starting literally that day about climate change. Some are large, some are small.
Give me a hint of one big thing and one small thing I can do right now.
One big thing you can do right now, believe it or not, is to less food waste. Food waste is an incredible problem. Most people don't realize it, but it's as simple sometimes as eating your leftovers and not buying food that goes to waste. That's pretty simple. Here's a big thing. Get a heat pump. Put solar panels on your house. Those are things that not only help with climate change, they save you money. We can win-win in a lot of these transitions, not just to clean energy, but to a less emission way of life.
Chris Edwards, former Fox 2 meteorologist and climate change expert. It's always great to see you. Thanks for joining us. And welcome back to your old digs. This is where I used to do the news.
Here. You guys have spruced the place up. It's very nice.
They made a lot of money off of the years that you were here, and they built the place up because of that. Thank you,
Looks
Chris.
good, Roop.
That is the Pulse for tonight. Thanks for joining us. I'm Roop Raj. As always, it was great to be with you.